And so we are moving to Ren's presentation now, who is going to talk about learning from the voices of our Indigenous teachers. So please, Ren, again.
Hi, everyone. Just before I do start, just want to really thank Nat for her presentation. It was really powerful, really moving. And yeah, just wanted to thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah, it was really insightful for me. And yeah, thank you. So I'm going to try and share my screen, Carla. Oh, can you see that, Carla?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, so thank you for having me. I'm really just, yeah, really hard act to follow. Thanks, Nat. Really just sharing the findings from my PhD study, which was what was helping our teachers, Indigenous teachers, to remain in the profession. Now it's not going to work. Great. Just going to stop. Just why is it not working? I'm just going to have to do it manually. Sorry about this. Okay. So, thank you, Carla, for doing the acknowledgement of country. So I won't repeat. Carla did an amazing job, but I'm a bit of a nerd on social media, and I was on LinkedIn, and I did see that I was wearing the same shirt to advertise for this, so I apologise. But I did see this great article from Professor Yin Paradies, and for me it was he kind of captures I suppose the essence of how I want to approach my research. So I just read it out because it's really profound. And I think for us as researchers, not just Indigenous researchers, but for all researchers, I think this is really, it's great wisdom and knowledge. And we often want to talk about embedding Indigenous perspectives. Well, for me, this is it in words. So sensing, attending, and being patient requires slowing down, pausing, and taking time to listen, to look, feel, and learn. Seeking to activate and use all of our senses to relate as part of the world. This involves learning through relationships, through actions, and through careful attention, not just through asking questions and talking a lot. Being patient and humble enables recognition of the myriad of messages that humans and non-human beings are always sending out. So for me, and you know, I kind of talk back in some of my research about the actual what research is, and it's always, I suppose, looking at problems and coming up with solutions and yes, talking a lot. But from an Indigenous lens, sometimes I think we have to stop and definitely slow down and to actually to listen. So a bit about as a part of my Indigenous way of knowing, being, doing is about positioning who I am and my position within the research. So I am a Quandamooka man from Minjerribah, from Stradbroke, and the pictures there kind of about who I am. I'm going to move it over here. So the picture on the top left is my grandfather, who is a Wakka Wakka man, and that's him on the far left. And he did fight in World War II, and he fought over in Japan. and it's really hard to find his war records as an Aboriginal man serving his country. And the picture on the right, top right, is my grandmother, who was the oldest of 10 children, and she was born at Cherbourg, which is an Aboriginal, was an Aboriginal reserve, northwest of Queensland. And I suppose my position, and the bottom left is a picture of Minjerribah. So, and the QR code is a bit of story about, my identity and how that shapes my research. But what I suppose why it's important is because I want my position to contribute to our mob through education and through research. This is just a really snapshot of the abstract of my PhD. It was basically to focus on and centering the voices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teachers. And I want to find out their reasons for choosing to stay in the profession when in the literature and in the media, there was so much noise about why teachers were leaving the profession. So I kind of wanted to find out why our mob, who are teachers, are staying in the profession. So the objectives of this presentation is to illuminate the key findings from my study, showcasing the voices of Indigenous teachers. It's going to discuss their motivations, the nature of their relationships, and the significance of role models in enhancing educational outcomes. So the context for the research was, as I mentioned, it's pretty common knowledge that we have a teacher shortage in this country and in other countries around the world. But the context for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teachers is that we are underrepresented in the profession. So the data shows that our teachers make up 2.1% of the teacher population. That's in contrast to the population of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students in Australian schools as of the 2021 census. So we still need more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teachers to have parity, and just from discussions with the Department of Education in Queensland, I think at least that sector and jurisdiction are on the same page and the same wavelength. They would like to have more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teachers in their schools. So just quickly, this is my research design. It's basically captured in an image. I used a strength-based approach really to talk back to the deficit lens that is often used when talking about our mob. So I wanted to look at the strengths that our teachers bring to schools and to the profession and to all students. I use yarning as my method to gather the data. I used a reflexive thematic analysis, Braun and Clark's work. I used community sampling in that I didn't go through schools, I didn't go through the gatekeepers. I actually spoke to Indigenous teachers in their communities, and they were semi-structured interviews. They were yarns pretty much. So pretty free-flowing and a lot of the times unstructured. But we had some wonderful stories and some really rich data. So, as I mentioned, I used Braun and Clark to analyse the stories from the teachers, and that, that it actually, I used a reflexive approach because I actually built up a relationship with these teachers. As an Indigenous researcher, yarning with Indigenous teachers, my position within the research was really important because it wasn't one way. It was a relationship. So, and I found that approach really fit with my positioning as a researcher. So the key findings from the investigation, it revealed three significant themes. There was more, but these were probably the key themes that came out why Indigenous teachers were remaining in the profession. So there were motivational factors, relationships, and role models that influence Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander teachers' commitment to the profession, pretty much the reasons why they were staying in the profession. So I'm just going to now look at the three themes that are identified. So the motivational factors that inspire teachers, the importance of nurturing relationships within the profession for Indigenous teachers, and I think for all teachers, and the impact of role models for Indigenous teachers within Indigenous education. So the first theme was the motivational factors, and Indigenous teachers, the ones I spoke to, cited intrinsic motivations. So it wasn't things like pay or career, or they were things that about their commitment to their community, their commitment to their family. So that sense of giving back to their mob, that was one of the quotes from one of the participants. They believe that their roles as professionals, as teachers, are vital for the cultural and educational advancement of Indigenous young people. So there was that actual, I suppose, embodiment of that being seen where we had once not been seen. The second theme that emerged was the importance of relationships, strong interpersonal relationships with students, with their families, and with their communities serve as crucial support systems. So there I've got a couple of quotes from the participants, that the centrality of relationships to our people. So how important was it for them? And this is a strength that they actually brought into the profession, I believe. And another one of the participants said, how significant, the significance for them was of their family and relationships as to why they remained in the profession. And the third theme was the importance of role models, role models and allies. So one of the things it was about, as I suppose, having agency within the schools that they were working in, and that their knowledge was being acknowledged by the school and by the system, I suppose. Indigenous teachers also reflected on the significance of being role models. They emphasise the importance of representation in education, as it strengthens students' identities and cultural pride, motivating them to succeed. So there's been a project in another state where students, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, are being asked, would you become a teacher? And the majority have said, no, I won't name the state. And then the question was, well, why not? And then a lot of them responded, well, we don't see Indigenous teachers, so it's not something we have thought about. So there was that. So the teachers I spoke to said, well, we want to be those role models. And for a lot of the teachers I spoke to, they didn't have that when they were going to school. I think only one had witnessed an Indigenous teacher in their schooling. So some of the unexpected findings, which, because I used a strength-based approach, was for the Indigenous teachers, this was unanimous. All the teachers I spoke to had lived experiences of racism or dealing with racism. So there's just the quote there from one of the participants. It makes it hard for us to stay as teachers as well, just fundamental racism. And some of it is less overt, I used to think that I didn't belong. So this was from a teacher. And also the other unexpected findings, because, I didn't explicitly say I'm using a strength-based approach, but this came up. So the importance of the strength-based approach. And this is, again, one of the comments from one of the participants. I've got a valuable contribution to make to the community. To the knowledge I bring my voice, and my physical presence in our school. So some of the implications of the findings, still working on that, as you know, I only finished the PhD this year, but the findings highlight the critical motivational factors influencing Indigenous teachers, including the desire to foster cultural identity and community engagement. These motivations underline the importance of supportive educational environments that embed Indigenous knowledges and perspectives. So what is the relevance to our communities? The study underscores the vital role of Indigenous teachers in strengthening cultural ties and providing authentic representation in classrooms. Our presence not only impacts student success, but also promotes community resilience and community and cultural practices. So what are some recommendations for educators, for teachers, for teacher educators? Well, educators are encouraged to implement culturally responsive teaching strategies that reflect Indigenous values and practices. This approach fosters a positive learning environment that can enhance student engagement and retention. So some future directions for research. Future research should delve into deeper qualitative studies that amplify Indigenous voices and perspectives in education. Additionally, examining the impact of community involvement on teacher retention can lead to actionable strategies that support Indigenous educators and enrich their teaching environments. So to close, the voices of Indigenous teachers are critical in shaping effective educational practices. By understanding their experiences and challenges, stakeholders can create a more inclusive education system that values their contributions and fosters a supportive community for present and future educators. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ren, for your presentation. I personally find it very interesting, and if nobody else have questions, I do have them, but because I'm chairing, I'm going to provide the floor for anyone wanting to ask questions. Nat?
Thanks, Ren. I'm just wondering the demographics, the geographical demographics of the teachers you interviewed. Were they mainly regional or mix of metropolitan regional, and were there any differences just based on where they were?
Yeah, great question. And I had that from one of my examiners. Thanks, Nat. Yeah, it was a mix. So it was pretty much snowballing. I kind of used my relationality. And so just, you know, you would connect with mob who were teaching and they would know someone. So, but it ended up being quite a cross representation. The majority were from Queensland. There were some from Cairns and Townsville and in and around Brisbane, but I had some from other states, and I had one teacher who had taught only in remote schools in Northern Territory and WA. So I had a good mix, and I had a good mix of male and female Indigenous teachers. So they all were experienced. That was part of the criteria, that they had at least 6 years teaching experience. But yeah, so it was a good mix of age, experience, and geographical location. I didn't set out to, and that would be probably something I'd like to, expand on further, is to look at what are some of the differences. And there has been some research on the impact of Indigenous teachers in remote communities and remote schools, and then the burden on them to be the be all and end all for the school. So there is work in that area, but it's an interesting question, that geographical, where our teachers are.
Thanks,
Tasha?
Hi, Ren. Thank you for your presentation.
Hi, Tasha.
Hey, I was just wondering, in terms of, because we know that retention for teachers is such a huge issue, and it would be even more so, I think, for Indigenous teachers when there's so much pressure and burden placed on Indigenous teachers. When you were interviewing the teachers, did any of them give any insights into things that schools were doing that were actually working well? We know that institutions often don't. So were there any sort of examples that you felt were good?
A lot of the times the teachers were left to their own, I suppose, agency, and it was often like if there was a mentor that the teacher had, it was often informal and not organised by the school. The teachers I spoke to anyway, Tasha, I know that has changed. I know some teachers who've, early career teachers, Indigenous teachers who are mentored and supported. But the teachers I spoke to, there was more barriers than support from the schools that they were working in. So it was more, I suppose, their strengths, their resilience, their support of their family and the community, and then allies within the school, because it was often not other Indigenous teachers that they could get support from. So, it was quite isolating. So it was, I'm just trying to recall, Tasha, and I don't think there was a school or an experience that would any of the participants had that great experience, or the school was doing something above what they would do for their teachers. Which I think that could actually inform policy, that very gap.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Tasha.
Ren, we have some questions on the chats. Maybe you want to look at them?
If you
want me to read them, I can read them for you. What are enrollments of Indigenous students in ITE programs? Curious if the problem is retention in ITE programs and or in the profession, or not wanting to go into the profession in the first place. Parlo's question.
Yeah, thanks, Parlo. No, it's a really good question, because I've done a little bit of look and analysis of we are attracting some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students or undergraduates into teaching programs, but then we're finding that a critical point where they may drop out is at usually at their final prac. And it's not all, because we're obviously got quite a number of Indigenous teachers, 2.1%. So some must be going through, but quite a lot are doing quite well in their program. But for some reason the prac is the point where they're not going on to become teachers. So I think that's something we need to look at, Carlo.
Sorry, Ren. Anything to do with racism?
Well, I suppose it's been recorded, so I can't tell you the truth, but is it one wink for yes? Look, racism does play a big part in the experiences that they're having in their pracs, and it does correlate to what the findings were from my research. So yes.
Thanks, Ren. I mean, it's kind of curious, and I know it is being recorded, but increasingly that I'm hearing there has been a rise in racism, and concerns being raised about the rise in racism from different organisations. So what you're suggesting is not necessarily, what do I want to say, surprising.
But that's the sad thing, Parlo, is that it's not surprising. In 2024, and the fact that it's increasing, it's disgusting. And I just think we have and it's schools and education which should be addressing this. And yet this is where we have young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, undergraduates having experiencing racism. It's wrong.
Deb Begali and normally Fernando, and I'm not promoting their book per se, but I was fortunate enough to be writing the foreword. Their whole book is about it, right across all institutions, and also talk about how it's exacerbated after the referendum as well. So, I do think it's something that does need to be talked about. There's too much. Well, I've actually heard some people say, no, we're not going to go there. We're not going to talk about it. Well, if you don't talk about it, then how do you address it?
Yeah. And you can put the link of the book in, Paolo. I'm sure Deb would be happy. And on a personal note, Paolo, I was caught up with Amanda and Joe Lampert. I can't remember, Amanda, was it Tuesday? And Joe Lampert said to say hello, Paolo.
Gone. Thank you, Ren. And there's another question, but I don't know whether you can answer or not. Apologies for not knowing, but what does Griffith do to recruit, support, mentor, and sustain Indigenous teachers? Kim is asking.
Yeah, I certainly didn't expect Ren to be the person to answer that at all. That was really just for everybody because I don't know.
Thank you.
Unless you want to respond.
Yeah, look, I was saying to Carla and to Nat before, like I got the time wrong. So I was just having a yarn with Peter Anderson, Kim, and I think the issue is that we just don't have enough of us in the system. In the School of Education, we've got Candice and I, and then places like Monash don't have anyone, and so and then the broader question is, well, what is the university sector doing? And I do like Universities Australia approach and with their strategy, but unless it's practiced or implemented, or there's some actual physical things that are done, and it's really hard to change people's behaviours and attitudes and just how they think. Their biases that people have. So it's a really.
You don't have to answer. It could be rhetorical. It could just be asking all the people here who have some power or say in this space. What are we doing? That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we need to do more.
Probably we have some time for the last question. Sama is asking, could you please describe an example yarning session and how things unfolded now or later?
Yeah. So the kind of refers back to Nat's question. So one of the my participants was an elder from Western Australia, and there were 3 sub questions, and I didn't get to any of them, and I had a time frame of I think about 45 minutes to an hour. This one went for an hour and a half, so we just had a yarn, and he was just talking about his experiences in different schools that he had worked in. He'd been a principal. He worked predominantly in remote schools, and then his own experience about being a student in a private schooling system and dealing with racism. So, but I'll tell you what, transcribing that interview was because I didn't use NVivo or anything. It was Ren. So I use Ren software. So transcribing that yarning, but for me, it was being true to who I am. It was being true to yarning. It was true to being, Indigenous research. So that's why I transcribe my own interviews. And I just wanted to honour Uncle's story. And then I was part of it. Another yarning I had with a younger teacher, and we actually did ours face to face, and at the end of it we were both in tears. So that you're not a passive. It's not passive when you're yarning. You're part of the research. It's really powerful.
Thank you so much, Ren. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. And we are just in time. Thank you, everyone, again. Excellent presentation, as Nandini is saying. And see you in the next Lion Talks.
Thanks, Carla.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.